Welcome to A Date with Darkness podcast, where I will be discussing the impact of hurtful and abusive relationships and how to overcome them so that you can move through your pain and get to the kind of healthy relationships you want, need, and deserve. I'm Dr. Natalie Jones. I'm a licensed psychotherapist based in California. While I hope that you find this podcast educational and informational, please note it should not be substituted for treatment with a licensed mental health professional. Also, due to the nature of the podcast, some of the information presented on the show can be sensitive to some of my listeners, so please note that listener discretion is advised. Hi, welcome to the show, Diane.
Oh, I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks, Natalie.
Hi, I'm so excited. It's like, oh, I get to talk to all the greats on my show. So I love doing this. So for people who may not be familiar with you or what you do, can you tell us who you are, what you do, and the passion behind your work?
Oh, okay. My name's Dr. Diane Poole Heller, and I specialize in trauma resolution and also early attachment injury. Because one of the things I discovered in working with trauma for 35 years is that one of the biggest problems with it, I mean, there's several different challenges, but that we experienced broken connections. So then I got really interested and passionate about finding out what the how to repair relationship after we've suffered from trauma or that may have not been resolved for a while. And so I decided to go to the very beginning, which is attachment theory, like what happens from the moment of conception in the womb, all the way into how we imprint caretaking styles, and sometimes it's medical conditions or, our own temperament that we come in with, but what is influencing our relational template. And then if we subsequently experience stress of life, which is going to happen in some way, shape, or form, how do we then recover into healthy relationship again? So that's one of the reasons that I got so excited about attachment work. And I find it just a really great metaphor for the human journey. I mean, we're all struggling to have healthier relationships and also to overcome stressful events. It's part of our life. It's, I think, a natural part of the human journey. So I find it really relevant and a great entry point for working on ourselves and understanding ourselves and other people a little bit more compassionately without shame and blame. So I find that's really helpful.
I love that. And I appreciate you for saying that. And I totally agree with you. And I feel like, as therapists, as clinicians, regardless of what your specialty is, I do think that attachment always plays a key piece in that. So whether it's depression, anxiety, whether it's weight, whether it's sexual trauma and things like that, I think at some point during your therapeutic journey, I think that attachment always comes into play.
Yeah, I think it's highly relevant. Really, when you think about we're relational brain. We have a relational brain. We regulate through co-regulation. It's really important that we're able to connect deeply to our authentic self, but also be engaged with other people in a way that really supports us and we feel is authentic, and it's okay to be vulnerable. And, you pick the people that you feel deserve to hear your story, but also just to have the skill of relating is, I think even today with kids growing up with so many devices in front of their face, our face-to-face time, not FaceTime on a phone, but actual 3D FaceTime is really important to help us develop some of the social engagement skills. And, that's got interrupted with the pandemic and all the isolation that ensued from that. And then also that we are using technology often like we're doing right now for very pro-social, great reasons, but also sometimes if we're only doing technology, we're not as relationally fluent as we might want to be.
Connected, right. For you, what is your own sort of thoughts or connections that you've made between trauma and attachment?
Well, I feel that trauma challenges our nervous system in terms of if we can regulate or not, how we might get stuck in a pattern of always being in a stress response too often, which really is debilitating to our immune system and our health. Trauma might include, reiterating what happened, like through images or dreams or flashbacks. There's all sorts of different ways that affects us. But like I said earlier, I think one of the most devastating parts of trauma is that it sometimes really interferes with our ability to connect to ourselves and sometimes even our own body, like we're a little bit disconnected or dissociated. Our own body, our own grounding, our own centering, and then also our ability to be present to another person and be aligned and attuned in a way that we are actually being empathetic to what their situation is. We can step into their shoes, we can resonate, we can be sort of unflappable when conflicts arise. We can recover relatively quickly.
Yes.
We can feel safe in the presence of another person. We can have protective support systems. I mean, there's all these different things that attachment influences. And then there's just elements of secure attachment that we can actually break down into learnable practices if we weren't born. I think of it as hitting the jackpot, born into a pro-social, really safe family that was very relationally skilled from the get-go with our parents and our siblings. I mean, that's a super gift because you don't even realize you have that gift, except that you might notice other people don't. And if you have it, you just take it for granted. But it's a really important basic foundation because your early imprinting is also tied into your brain development. Your brain's trying to help you survive, right? It wants you to be around. So if you're born into a really scary family or a family struggling with poverty or addiction, or life is tough, you could be born into a war zone, different things could happen that your parents have no control over, and some things they do have their control over, like how they parent. But and when I talk about parenting, I always want to say, if you're listening to this and you're a parent, probably most people listening are parents, you want to just take that weight off your shoulder. This is like we learn this and we know it as we know it, so, and we can, it's never too late to start to infuse secure attachment habits into your relationships with your family or your partner or your kids or your grandkids or your work colleagues or your friends. And sometimes we just don't know. That's a funny thing about relationships. Everybody has this idea you should just know how to do it. I don't think that's true at all.
Very true.
And I think this should be taught in schools from kindergarten on up. I mean, it's just could be so helpful. So I got off on a left there a little bit, but I'm just trying to say that I think there's lots of ways we can learn, and we can learn as we are ready in little steps. There's lots of ways to move in a direction that helps us feel more connected and more supported and safer in our life.
Absolutely. And I think the thing to understand, and I think also a great part of your work is that relationships can be traumatic. Like the very
Mhm.
earliest relationships can be traumatic in a number of
Yes.
ways.
And that's really what happens with the brain development that I was starting to talk about earlier is the parts of the brain that are hyper reactive to threat, the amygdala, the limbic brain, the reptilian brain, they're going to get really wired to be like on alert all the time because they're experiencing their environment as dangerous. So they're really going to amp up. Your brain's going to amp up and have more access to all the threat responses. So that's why it's a little easier to get habituated to a stress response or hyper alertness or easy startle response, with the tiny triggers, if you were raised in a somewhat dangerous situation or a really chaotic situation. And then you have that kind of basic training in your brain. If you like hit the jackpot, like pro-social families, then the parts of the brain that are about empathy and attunement and the medial prefrontal cortex that's about social engagement, your facial expression where you're communicating emotional states and you're able to read other people's cues through your face. So we have very intricate technology in a sense in our face that gives us the ability to be empathetic and compassionate, and that's going to get really emphasized if you're in a pro-social family. That doesn't mean if you were born, because many of us were, and me included, born into a pretty challenging family circumstance, that's too bad and too bad for you. It's not at all like that, because we can learn to the skills because they're naturally to our biology. I really believe we're programmed
Yeah.
inherently, biologically, for secure attachment. And then sometimes a lot of things get dumped on top of it that we need to peel off and heal from, but it's there, and our body knows how to do it, our brain knows how to do it, our nervous system knows how to do it. It's just that if you start out with sort of a traumatized situation that your brain is acclimatized to, it takes a little longer, a little more practice, because you just don't have that foundation of secure attachment. People that have a foundation of secure attachment, if they run into trauma later, which often, life brings us really challenging things a lot of the time, they usually can recover quickly, or sometimes they don't even get PTSD, because it mitigates against PTSD if you have a foundation in secure attachment. But you can also learn secure attachment, so you can have that anyway. You just have to go through the steps of learning it, where if you came by it naturally because your family was so pro-social, then you kind of have that built in.
And I'm wondering if you could share a little bit about how someone who is maybe, and I would imagine there's a different process if you're anxious, if you're avoidant, or if you're attached, or if you're anxious, ambivalent, anxious, resistant, all the other little
Right.
subtypes,
Right.
or disorganized. How would they go about learning how to become securely attached?
Well, I do have a book. I'm not trying to sell books, but I do have a book that outlines this much more than I'm
Yeah,
going to be able to do right now, just in case somebody
absolutely.
wants an extra resource. It's just called The Power of Attachment. And then I also have CDs called Healing Your Attachment Wounds. And they're both published by Sounds True, and you can get them on Amazon if you want them. But we also have a free attachment quiz if you're curious and want to get a little idea of a thumbnail sketch of where you might be landing. This is not a research document kind of quiz. It's really purely for personal exploration. And it's on our website, dianepooleheller.com. DIANEPOOLE Heller, HELLER.com. Yeah. So you're welcome to take that as many times as you want. It's free. I suggest you take it and you think about when you're not on your best day, because that's kind of your default to your attachment injury, or maybe when you're tired or feeling a little sick. And then also one relationship at a time. So think about, okay, this is how it was with my dad. This is how it was with my partner. This is how it is with my eldest child. You want to focus on one relationship at a time, because our attachment system is very fluid in terms of who you're with. So when we're stressed, it will default to your original injury, but it will respond. Like if you're talking to someone who's extremely avoidant, you might find yourself becoming more anxious, just in response to the other person. So that's why I'd like you to take the quiz, specific to somebody, and then maybe not on your best day. So for the avoidant, just a thumbnail sketch of this, because I know you guys talk about attachment a lot on the podcast. Basically, what we feel a child will adapt towards an avoidance style would be if parents are just, whatever happened in their life, they're just not present. They don't have a capacity really to show up in a warm, present, eye contact, full, juicy kind of way. And so if you think about being a baby and you're reaching out for you're 100% dependent on this person, you're reaching out for mom or dad, and there's kind of this feeling no one's home, that's really terrifying for a little infant, right? That's not just like, oh, too bad. That's really terrifying, because you need that person and you need them to be there. The other way it can set up is if a parent is actively rejecting. So they're like looking at a child with anger or contempt or hatred even. Maybe they just have this reaction to the child for some reason. That's really debilitating and will cut the ability to connect for the avoidant. And then the other way avoidance shows up, interestingly enough, is if parents are present, but they're only present when they're teaching you something. Like, so they're really accessing the left brain. They're teaching you to read. They're teaching you to write. They're teaching you to ride a bike. They're teaching you to, I don't know, play golf or play chess or whatever, or your words or how to spell. But they aren't present emotionally. They're not attuned to what you're feeling, how you might feel sad with one of your friends rejected you at recess or whatever. So there's pretty much three ways avoidant can arise as an internal working model, an internal reference point for a person in terms of caregiving. Now, remember, this could also happen from medical procedures. Maybe there's birth trauma. Maybe your mom had to be in the hospital, or you were premature and you had to be in an incubator. There's different things that can impact that can take people to avoidant that have nothing to do with parenting. So I just want to mention that. And then in terms of healing it, was what you really asked. One of the things that's so important, because often when somebody has then felt isolated, like nobody else is there, they kind of feel like they have to do it themselves. And as an infant, you know, you really can't. That's kind of built on deficiency. There's a capacity for self-efficiency, self-efficacy, but then there's also underneath it this feeling that nobody's there for me. So often they deny their own needs, or they feel like they're the only person that can meet their own needs. So they never ask for help, which means they don't often have a support system. That is such an advantage in life to have people that are there for you. And then of course you can be for other people too. They often will feel like they just want to do things alone. They're into just, okay, I'm going to be on the computer. I'll just play games. I'm not really involved in things that involve other people, or it doesn't mean I don't have friends. And I want to really emphasize that people that tend towards avoidant, they want relationship just like everybody else does. It's just that their way to reacting to the threat and the difficulty of their particular situation was to turn the attachment system off, put the brakes on it, just to sort of disengage from the cues to connect, because their early experiences where it didn't work, that was really painful. So what you need to know if your partner's that way, or you're struggling with that a little bit, I think I have a little bit of all three of them. So I'm balanced. I have a little access to all of them. Is if your partner or your child you feel is tending towards avoidant, one thing you want to do is give them time to adjust when they're coming up from, like if you're inviting them to go to the movie or their favorite restaurant or something, they need time to go from their deep aloneness into connection. So a lot of times when you invite them, if you don't give them time to transition, they'll act really annoyed, like, why are you bothering me? And you're just trying to give them something, so it's confusing, causes arguments that aren't necessary. And if you just say something like, hey, sweetie, I want to have some time with you. How much time do you need to surface? I'd really like to go to the 4:00 movie. That gives us an hour. Is that enough time? You give them time to transition. Usually that works really, really well.
Good.
So just little tips. There's little things like that. And then if you happen to be avoidant yourself, the other thing you might notice, or you might notice about avoidant partner, is that emotional states are a little challenging. Your own and being around other people that are having emotional reactions, like maybe your partner lost their parent or their pet or something and they're in grief, you might have this feeling like, I got to get out of here. This is uncomfortable. And if my partner's having that reaction and I'm kind of attuned and I'm not taking it personally, because if you understand attachment, one of the gifts of it is you stop taking a lot of things personally. You realize a lot of this happened a long time ago and doesn't have so much to do with your current relationship. So if I had an avoidant partner and I was really upset about something, and I have every right to be really upset about it or grieving or whatever, I might say, honey, I can see that you're sort of your eyes are glazing over. I can see that you're just getting really uncomfortable. How about this? How about you go walk the dog for 30 minutes and then come back and kind of get yourself centered and everything. When you come back, I do really need you to be here for me emotionally. I really, can you do that? Can you lean in? And you give your partner a break instead of going, you're never here. You're not paying attention. You're not listening to me. It's a very different kind of communication if you really understand and take into account your own attachment system and the other person. Now, if I'm the person reacting to emotions, I might say, hey, sweetie, I really want to be, I get it. You lost your mom, your grandmother, it had this really big disappointment. I really want to be here for you, but you know what? I'm getting really overwhelmed. Would you be okay if I took a 15-minute walk the dog? I'll be back and I will be here. So you can communicate it in a way that's really supportive to both people. Does that help?
It does help, I think, and those sound very reasonable and logical, like those explanations. But I know that a lot of times with avoidance or with ambivalence, communication is often the hardest part. Communication and understanding what they're feeling.
Exactly. So if we go to ambivalent, one of the things that's really important to understand about ambivalent is they reacted to their early challenges with caregiving or whatever the circumstances were by overactivating their attachment system. So they are hyper alert to social cues about connection and disconnection. And the problem is they're really good at reading cues. Yeah. The difficulty is they tend to misinterpret them gravely towards the negative. So you could be smiling and they might somehow figure out a way to think that means rejection. I mean, it's just they are so hyper focused on, am I being liked? Am I being rejected? And boy, social media just kills us on that anyway. So, so if you're a partner to an ambivalent, one of the things you can do that really helps them relax that overactivated attachment system is a lot of reassurance. It's, hey, you're my guy, you're my gal, you're in my heart. When I go on my business trip, I take you with me everywhere I go. Texting them, hey, I'm at the airport. Hey, I arrived in Chicago. Hey, I'm at the hotel. Just staying connected, even through a few texts, just keeps their attachment system calmer, because they're always ready to be rejected. They're just ready. They're ready and waiting. They're sure it's going to happen. They just don't know when. So they tend to be anxious. It's like, I mean, you can imagine if you're always thinking it's around the corner, it's tricky. But the point I also want to make with dealing with attachment injury, as you start to help and avoid and feel the nourishment of connection, that's a corrective experience to the isolation and the rejection they might have experienced, or the lack of presence, they will start to move towards secure attachment, and they become more engaged and less isolated. But it just takes some transition time. And an ambivalent person, as they get the reassurance and they start to feel the relationship is stable, and you say things that, you keep reinforcing that, they start to relax and they don't need so much reassurance. It's not like you have to do it forever, that it usually takes, depending on how much you are on the continuum, probably a year to year and a half, 2 years, maybe, for some of these things to really sink in a new relationship, because you're learning each other. It takes a while, and you get through the honeymoon period, and then all the attachment injuries start to show up. You need time to navigate that. But if you understand your own, you can say, hey, you know what, I tend to really think you're rejecting me when you don't smile in the morning. I'm making a story up in my head that you don't love me. You're out the door. You're never coming back. And they're like, no, I'm just not a morning person. I need my cup of coffee. You need to communicate those things, because an ambivalent is going to interpret all of that as, you're leaving me, you're out of here. And then of course they get kind of needy. They're trying to stabilize the relationship. So they're sometimes over gripping on the relationship. And then sometimes it's really sad, because they push away the people they want to be the closest to them, not meaning to, because they're really trying to have the relationship work. So they're very obviously interested in relationship, unlike avoidance. Sometimes people read that as they don't want a relationship, which I don't believe is true. It's just a reaction to the stress of being rejected. They turn the attachment system off. The opposite is true for the ambivalent. They amp it up. And it's easier to calm down an amped up attachment system than sometimes to lift the brake on a shut down attachment system. But there are definitely ways to help with both of those dynamics.
The thought I had is like, with these, which we didn't get to disorganize, which is, I feel like disorganized.
We can talk about that. Sure.
Yeah. Let's talk about that, because I have some questions about, again, there's this period of sort of understanding and relearning about each other, which you speak of, and sort of communicating in a way. But
Right.
I also imagine that for folks, there's like a storm before it gets to that sort of calm, and that storming might look like lashing out. That storming might look like ghosting
Right.
people for a while, or just sort of, these sort of repressed feelings or suspicions and doubts that push people away before they can even get to the point of moving towards security, even with a healthy person. So a healthy person, for lack of a better word, has to be able to sort of withstand some stuff, some abusive
Right.
there, or can be emotionally abusive or taxing. So there's got to be that sort of labor that's put in and adjusted for. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so. Just to say a little bit about disorganized. First of all, disorganized is a little bit of the more severe reactions of both avoidant and ambivalent. So it can go from extreme dissociation, isolation, and ghosting to emotional flooding and hyper neediness and just emotional flooding. So, or you can have your system wired where when you go into the disorganized usually happens when there's been trauma, like abuse, sexual, emotional, physical. It can also be happen when there's too much chaos, or too much, like I think sometimes too much uncertainty, too much chaos when there's custody battles, or kids just get in the middle of all that, and sometimes it's really, really challenging. And you can have situational disorganized. So maybe you had a parent that yelled at you. So loud noises trigger you into this kind of dissociative or fragmented state. It doesn't have to be constant. You could be mostly secure and then just situationally disorganized when a certain trigger happens from trauma. Or sometimes you're continually disorganized because your whole family dynamic was abusive and difficult and challenging. And we don't make up our attachment reactions. We come by them honestly. And usually there's a lot of fear. So it's really important when there's a disorganized reaction that we emphasize safety, that we try to work out what works for a person in terms of feeling physiologically, emotionally, or psychologically safe. We need to help people regulate, because their nervous system just immediately goes into extreme limbic reaction, and that's when they lash out, or they, just completely shut down, go into a freeze immobility response. They can't talk or feel paralyzed, feel cold. They just can't really access any of their higher brain function. So reasoning with somebody when they're in a dorsal vagal or freeze response isn't going to work so well, because they don't have much access to their prefrontal cortex, and they're not really interested in relationship at that point. They're interested in surviving in the next 2 seconds, right? So they tend to go to fight or flight, which means they run out of the room. I'm never going to talk to you again. Or they get dookie. They want to punch, or they want to hit, or they want to throw pillows, or they want to, and that's of course not going to help resolve the relational trauma. So we're trying to be aware that when somebody's in a shutdown state, they're going to have limited access to their relational skills, almost none. And you basically lose connection to the higher functioning parts of the brain. And so we want to address safety first, because if a person feels safer, they move up into the higher parts of the brain, and they actually are interested in resolving something in the relationship. So you need to understand where you are and where the other person might be when you're in a conflict related to attachment, but also the nervous system and how the brain's functioning. Because a lot of times people try to even do like family system work or something, and when partners are dissociated and shut down, it's not probably going to be very effective at all. But once you are able to work with that defensive energy, help that regulate and calm down and discharge, and then people have access to their prefrontal cortex, then they are actually really available and interested, and have the capacity. They're hooked up to the right software to work on the relationship. So it's challenging, and sometimes you have two disorganized people together in a relationship, and you just need hope that they don't both dysregulate and go into extreme reactions at the same time. Hopefully somebody can be the stable one, the other one's freaking out a little bit, and the other one, and you can trade off and on. But ideally, as people learn self-regulation skills, and they learn how to help their partners and themselves feel safe at those times, that will make it a lot easier to access the higher levels of the brain. You get a lot further with working things out in your relationship.
Can you talk a little bit more about self-regulation?
Yeah, self-regulation, like right now, if everybody listening would think about just for a moment, where you feel just a little bit more centered, or a little less anxious, or a little more calm, maybe this week. When did that happen? Were you with a certain person? Do they have that calming effect on you? Were you out in nature, in the beauty, or were you gardening in your flowers? Were you dancing? Were you doing art? Was there some song that really means something to you, that just seems to have a calming, heart-opening kind of influence on you? And just to take a moment and bring that into your awareness, whatever it is. It could be more than one thing, but just at least one thing. And just notice, then switch your focus to your body and sensation, and just sort of notice what happens in your body as you find that resource. And now sometimes when we find a resource, it'll immediately be heart opening, warming, we feel more energy, we feel our body more. Other times when we find a resource, it actually opens us up into a wound, because your distraction, or your emotional reaction, or your whatever you're doing, shutdown, might be in reaction to a wound. So sometimes it'll actually support you to feel what's actually there needing to be felt. So just be gentle with yourself if that vulnerability might show up, or that tenderness might show up. That's okay. and then just see if you can continue to imagine this person that has a calming effect, or that you really feel loved by and supported by, is there with you, beside you, behind you, in front of you, however you want them to be, or this activity that you really enjoy, or hanging out with your dog, or whatever it might be. And that's just one example of finding resources and then feeling them. Finding resources is one step. The second step is really feeling what happens in your body and on a sensation level when you see the image of that, or you hear the voice of that person, or you smell the flowers, or whatever the trigger is for you for resource, can be really powerful. And that's just one way we help the nervous system. The nervous system's supposed to, take in some energy, discharge some energy, take in some energy, discharge. When it's in trauma, it's like going like this, way outside its normal range of resiliency. So we're just trying to invite it back into that center, sort of flowing, this being in the flow, and actually increasing, let's see if I can do this, increasing the range, so that maybe we might start with a resiliency range like this, but we want to grow it. And we grow it partly through self-regulating and co-regulating. Co-regulating is a little bit more what's happening with you with another person energetically.
And can you talk a little bit about that, and how a person with these different attachment styles can get to a place where they can co-regulate? Specifically, if, like, for example, if you're an avoidant and an anxious and you're in a relationship, or you're a disorganized and an anxious in a relationship, or if
Okay.
you may be ambivalent and with a secure person. So if your styles don't match,
Yeah, very often we aren't. It
yeah,
happens a lot that we're
or
in
they're an
different people
opposite.
come together with
Yeah.
different, and yeah. And we can have a mix of attachment styles. Like I said, I do. You can easily have a mix of attachment styles,
Yeah.
and that's very common as well. So in certain situations, you might react as an avoidant. In other situations, you might react as an ambivalent. It's fine. There's no problem there at all. That's why we like to give people the quiz. It gives them a little bit of a sense of that. So the challenge for the avoidant is that because there wasn't the presence of another person in the caregiver enough, that was safe enough, they often have a nervous system that's trying to self-regulate without co-regulating very much, because when they start to access another person, that feels a little scary, or like it's not going to work. I mean, and that most of this isn't conscious. This is just knee-jerk reaction, because it's what was programmed in the beginning. But you can change that programming. So I'm going to keep underlying that. So it's more, their learning edge is learning how to allow another person in. Like, you can suggest things like, when you're driving in the car, that you actually have a conversation with the person with you. You're not just driving and staring at the road, but you're saying, oh, wow, there's this, or this interesting scenic, or that you're talking and engaging with another person. And the other thing, like, when another person's emotional, you're leaning into it, you're learning how to tolerate it, but also take breaks if you need them. You need to do this in the way that's paced right for you. But that will start to allow you to have access to co-regulation, because the biggest challenge for avoidant is not really having access to co-regulation, because the other person wasn't in their life in a way that felt supportive, the other, whoever represents the other. So that's something that somebody can work on and learn how to do more, to do things where they're participating with another person. They're not just lost in their computer, but they're actually, coming out and having dinner and having FaceTime with the family and engaging. And that takes practice, because sometimes that doesn't feel so easy. And they're getting used to emotions, getting comfortable with different emotional expression. That can be really helpful for regulating and healing the avoidant. In ambivalent, they tend to be, from a regulation point, they're so focused, like avoidants are really focused on the self, because other felt not like a good thing, right?
Yeah.
And ambivalence that are anxious, they're really focused on other. They're like trying to figure out, how do I connect to this person? They're like a moving target. And so they're so focused on the other person, they're often not focused on themselves. So they often have a deficit around self-regulation. They don't have the idea or the experience that they can soothe themselves. They think that always has to come from the other person. So of course, if you have that experience, it's going to lead to putting a lot of pressure on other people to regulate you. like externally, not external to yourself. So it's important that we learn when we're in our ambivalent space, we learn how to self-soothe. And that little exercise I did earlier was self-soothing. And just to see if we can start to learn how to start to regulate. You can do vagal toning that helps you get the prefrontal cortex. It also is regulatory just by certain, like humming and singing
Hmm.
helps you vagal tone to go to the prefrontal cortex. Doing, if you speak Spanish, you do these R's, trilling. This comes from Lisa Wimberger's work on neurosculpting. Just shaking, like when you're like really activated for disorganized, just shaking it out can really help you release some and discharge some of the excess arousal in your nervous system, helps you regulate. Cold water on your face, cold shower, cold dips at the gym if you have it. Cold exposure really helps vagal toning, that helps you access social engagement. So, there's different things that you can do. I think also having rituals around coming and going, like how do you, if you're like in a marriage, or a partnership or something, how do you or even putting the kids to bed, how do you do nighttime rituals? Like I have friends, I love this ritual. They both love chocolate, so I can totally relate to that. And they love truffles. So they will buy each other these really special truffles, and they'll share one at like maybe 10 o'clock at night. And they debrief the day, how it all went. If they have any debris in their relationship, they clear it up. And they don't necessarily go to bed at the same time. One goes to bed earlier, one stays up later. It's just their pattern. But they have this time. It's a ritual. They do it every night. And that's very good for the attachment system. And it's also regulating. You feel like you're connected. When we feel connected and supported and loved by somebody, that's very regulating. That connection is very regulating. And I think that's one of the most damaging things about COVID and the pandemic, besides the whole illness part of it, which is devastating enough, is the isolation, and it broke a lot of our patterning around connection, but this truffle ritual is so figure out your own nighttime ritual with the people that you're living with, and just see if you can do something really loving or yummy, like going off into sleep, even if you don't do that at the same time, but you have a nighttime ritual. Same thing in the morning. Do you get up and immediately get on your computer, or do you cook breakfast together? Do you have a conversation about the day? You have, hey, what are you hoping will happen for you today? What's your high that you're looking for, hopefully to happen, or something? You're connecting. And this is true for coming back from work too. Like if one person's home already and they're cooking and maybe dealing with kids' homework or whatever, the other person comes in. Very often the first thing we say to our partners, hey, did you take out the garbage, or did you fix the car? Did you change the oil? We task people, which is not the most yummy thing. So if you can stop cooking and let the kids do their homework for a minute, and turn the fire off your food or whatever, and meet your person at the door and actually hug them, my full body hug, not a triangle hug that a lot of times we do, full body hug if it's appropriate to the relationship, right? And you can feel your bodies regulate each other. You want to stay belly to belly. And so like if I have a headache, my partner puts his hand on my head. If they have a low backache, I put my hand on their low back. So your two bodies regulating each other, whether parent, child, partner, and people want to be with bodies that regulate them, So you think about the people that are regulating in your life, you want to spend time with them because it feels really good. So you want to develop, these are practices that you can easily adopt. I mean, this one is called the Welcome Home Hug from Stan Tatkin. And I did this with a couple that was just getting a little snarky with each other. They really liked it. They really loved each other. But we just installed the Welcome Home Hug, and it just shifted their relationship so quickly. It's not rocket science. I mean, it's just, when I explain these things, they make sense biologically, right? I mean, it's not like you think, oh, well, where'd she come up with that? It's like, oh yeah, I could do, and they're doable, right? There's things you can do. They're not, I mean, it could be you have a little resistance at the beginning because you're not used to doing it, but you can get there. It's not that hard. And it can really make your attachment bond stronger, which is very regulating. When we feel connected and really in a healthy way, it just changes everything. It's the gift that keeps on giving. So I just try to make practical suggestions because there are things you can do right as soon as you get off this call, probably.
Yeah, and I love that. And I think, a large part of learning the regulation, self-regulation or co-regulation, or just becoming even more secure in attachment,
Yes.
I think a large part of that involves physical touch, platonic, non-sexual physical touch, because I think touch is also an awesome co-regulator, like you were saying, like the
Oh,
warm, fuzzy
definitely.
hug, and just having this exchange where yes, we're talking, but also learning that there's like this emotional safety in this other second co-regulator, which is touch.
Touch is very powerful. It really amplifies the healthy attachment system. Patty Wood wrote a book called Snap, and in that book, she talks about research that if say I'm regulated and I shake your hand, or we do some kind of, I
Yes,
touch your forearm or some safe kind of
sharing.
touch, but let's handshake because everybody's used to that. That if I'm regulated, it sends a neurochemical message to your nervous system, just like that, immediately to regulate you. It sends a big message to your nervous system to regulate. So that's the power of touch. And she said the research shows that it takes 3 hours of supportive talk to do the same thing. It could take that long. So it's just a matter of how important touch is. And so if you don't have, I know it's still COVID and everything. If you don't have somebody around that's your partner that's safe touch automatically, pets are great. But also, find a good body worker, get a great massage from somebody that is trauma informed, if that's part of your history, that has that sensitivity, but also does touch in a way that you feel is really right for you. That can also be really deeply healing and regulating. I'm a
I
big
like
believer
that.
in good body work.
Absolutely, and I totally agree with you. There's nothing else like it. Um, what if there's someone listening to you and maybe they're cognizant that they have some pretty significant trauma wounds or attachment issues,
Mhm.
but they don't want to necessarily go to a therapist or someone to help them with that?
Well, I think there's a lot of good books that give some good information on attachment. I think, I mean, I mentioned my books, but also there's the book called Attached by Amir Levine and Rachel
Yes,
Heller. I
yes,
think that's a good resource for people. The only
yes.
thing I would say about that particular and some writers is that sometimes I disagree with how they describe avoidant, because
Correct.
they sometimes you can get the impression that they feel like avoidant people don't want relationship. And I totally don't
Yes,
agree with that.
I don't
I
agree
really
with that
feel that
either.
they just reacted to the wound around connecting in a
Absolutely.
different way. So I would just, if you're going to read those books, just make sure you hear me say that. Don't take that part.
Uh,
That I just don't feel that is
yeah,
helpful. But there's a lot of good resources out there, I'm sure. Podcasts like this, and
yeah,
you know, I mean, attachment's something we're living every day, all the time, almost all the time.
absolutely.
So I just think learning I call it secure attachment skills. Like I said, the comings and goings, the welcome home hug ritual, certainly repairing when somebody, you step on somebody's toes and you're attuned enough to realize, I kind of said that abruptly, or, oh, I just hurt that person's feelings, that you just acknowledge it as soon as you can manage it. Sometimes we can't do it immediately, but just say, you know what, I think when I was trying to get you ready for school this morning, you were late and you were messing around with breakfast, and the school bus was out there and I was going to shove you out the door, just say, we just need to get up 15 minutes early so we're not so stressed getting you off, and I want to get you off in a, really nice way in the morning. That you're repairing, you're paying attention to the relational dynamics
Mhm.
and attending to them. John Gottman did this wonderful research on couples and relationships. He's amazing. All his books are great too. But he found that couples that knew how to initiate repair and to receive repair, because sometimes we block people's repair.
Yeah,
We're like, well, you didn't say you were sorry within the first 24
absolutely.
hours, so it doesn't count. Or you bought me flowers and I really wanted candy, so it doesn't count. Or you said this word and I don't like that word. I mean, we make it hard. And, if you can just give your partner or your kids a break, just like, okay, I get the intention to repair. Let's think about how we would do it differently next time, and repair it. And then of course you don't want to keep doing the same mistake, because if you say, okay, I won't do that again, and you do it again a lot, then that's going to not help for the repair. But couples and in relationships that people learn to initiate and receive repair, they have 85%. That's a lot more chance of sustainable well-being in their relationship. And I mean, I'm going to ask the audience, and I can't see your hands or anything, but how many people had parents that modeled that modeled repair? I mean, my parents didn't, very rarely did that. You know, that wasn't part of their vocabulary. So a lot of us have to learn it, and it can be a little uncomfortable in the beginning. Like, hey, you know, I really didn't, I could have handled that better. I just didn't do it, or I broke a confidence. I'm really sorry. I realize you told me this was only to be said to me, and then I told somebody else, and it really hurt you. I really sorry. You know, you need to do the repair and then make a big effort to have good boundaries in the future, right? So repair is huge. I mean, if you made 85% on money, you wouldn't even be stopping at Starbucks in the morning, because you'd be, your compound interest would be so huge, you know? So think about that when you're feeling hesitant about repair. Think I get 85% return. And that's really, even if the person doesn't receive your repair, you still did the maturation process of growing yourself up to be able to do it, and developed a skill that you can take forward into your life. So don't worry about it. I mean, you do your part. You can't be in charge of how people respond or if they accept your repair or not. Just let that part go, but just really practice keeping your own relationship world as clean as you can, you know, and what you're ready for. But that could be something you could challenge yourself to after the call today too. You could just say, I have a little residue in this relationship, or there's something that needs a little attention here. I think I could address it, and to see what happens in you, and perhaps even in the relationship.
One of the things, and I'm glad that you I'm glad that you brought up parental modeling, because that was actually going to be, that's actually part of my next question for you, in that, you know, if you're a person that has attachment trauma and you're working on all these wonderful things like regulation and co-regulation, but you still have a relationship with the parent or caregiver that was very traumatic for you, and it still continues to be traumatic. Do you think that that will block or hinder any sort of progress that we make in other areas?
I think anytime you're working on yourself, you're going to have good results in a lot of areas usually. But when we've had a caregiver that's been really challenging, sometimes as we heal our own attachment injury, even caused by that person, we can relate to them differently. And over time, sometimes their behavior shifts, or even if it doesn't, it's not injuring us over and over again. You know, we have more resiliency around it. You know, whoever has the most secure attachment in the room is going to have a lot of good influence on people around them, whether the other people are able to respond to it or not. Because every time they're maybe attacking, you're not responding by counterattacking. You're just saying, I can see your feelings are hurt about something, but you know, tell me what's really going on. I'm getting this complaint, but I'm wondering what's behind it. Like, where's this complaint coming from? Or, you know, there's different ways you can react that don't keep hurting you, and also don't keep fueling the negativity of the relationship. And that's advanced level work.
It is
That's advanced level work. You know, I remember reading a book by Carlos Castaneda. This is a throwback to the 70s. People don't even know who he is, probably. But he had this practice. He had a really terrible boss. I mean, this boss was attacking, mean, cruel, a real jerk, just completely awful. And he decided that he would stay working for that guy till nothing that this guy said to him had any impact on him. I thought, wow, that's a practice. You know,
that is a practice.
So, you know, it's like, I have a dynamic in my extended family where there's sort of an Archie Bunker character, except that he's not acting. It's for real. And so pretty negative interactions, and you know, coming from a lot of paranoia. And I just, when I think about visiting or being with that person, I just think about, like, I'm walking on the stage of Archie Bunker, and I just pretend I'm in a sitcom. And so when these really odd things come flying at me, I don't know, I can deflect it. I can just not take it in, because I'm somehow connecting to this idea. And so I used to have my clients figure out the sitcom that they wanted to pretend they went in when they went home for the holidays with their family. I mean, it just gives you a little psychological distance,
Right.
and
Right.
not to take things so personally, because this isn't about me. It's about wound. It's about unresolved
Yeah.
trauma, and when we have unresolved trauma, sometimes our behaviors can be pretty challenging,
Yeah.
pretty ugly sometimes,
I would agree
for
with
all of us. It's hard, it dysregulates you, and you're in your limbic brain, and you're acting out all over the place when you're very limbic, so if we understand and can help people move out of that. We aren't people's therapists, though. I mean, everybody kind of has their own homework. So I think there's a lot you can do inside therapy and a lot you can do outside therapy, because you're really working with the human journey. We're all
I
on this
love
human
that.
journey trying to do the best we can, navigating it.
I love that, and that is so true. Um, and I guess the part that I'm curious about is if these people are able to kind of do that, but they still get super triggered, because anytime you go into an environment that's
Well,
unhealthy.
I think it's a very individual decision. I know some people
Yeah,
feel like, this relationship is so toxic for me. I'm better off not participating,
yeah,
and just kind of either participating extremely minimally or not at all.
yes,
And
yes,
and that's a very personal decision. Like you always hope that reconciliation can happen, but sometimes things are so toxic that it just might be a better choice to find your network somewhere else,
mhm,
where it's empowering. I did sort of a garage sale on my relationships in the year 2001, where I just looked at like where do I feel supported, where do I feel empowered, where do I feel good in my relationships. I just put
yeah,
more energy in those relationships, and less energy, or maybe no energy, in the relationships that I felt were, toxic or not at all nourishing.
yeah,
And you'd sort of you have a right to be in relationships that are supportive to you. And then I think as we all do our own healing, we're able to be uh a sort of stable, and you're manifesting secure reactions to
yes,
situations around you. And I think that's a great gift. I think if the whole world kind of took it seriously for a year or
yeah,
two, we'd live in I mean, think about world leaders and corporate leaders and everybody just kind of going on educating people in school. Just if we could do this, it's not that difficult, really. It could be done. I'm still holding out for a relationship revolution, but I think this could be really powerful. And if we can do our own ourself, and then we can sort of
mhm,
impact people around us, and it's a wave that keeps on growing. And that's one of the reasons I think it's so important. I keep talking about how we get back to secure attachment, because it's it's a researched area. It's biologically valid, but also, even if you just use it as a metaphor, moving into healthier and healthier responsiveness instead of reactivity in
yeah,
our relationships, and not taking things so personally. So much of what happens in our life we take personally because we're
yes,
subjective, right?
yes,
Everything affects us. We think about it that way. But so much of it isn't personal. So much of it is people reacting out of their past, or projecting their past on the present, or projecting it on you, and you got to peel off that projection. You're not that perpetrator in their life or whatever. So it's challenging being a human being. It's not easy sometimes, but I think it's so helpful to just have some practical practices that might bring us
absolutely,
more joy and
absolutely.
connection.
I love that, and I thank you so much for that, and it's been awesome talking to you, but we're almost at the end.
I know. That time goes so fast.
It does. So I know you mentioned before, but can you just sort of tell folks how they can find you? If there's
Okay.
anything that you're sort of working on that we can support you with,
Okay.
and if you want to, mention any books or things in addition to what we've talked about, you guys can
Okay.
sort of tell us if you want there.
All right. Well, of course, I'd mentioned the Power of Attachment book, and then the CDs. Sometimes it's nice to listen to things in your car if you still have a CD player, called Healing Your Attachment Wounds. You can also get it streamable. And then my website, Diane Poole Heller, DIANE, one N, POOLE with an E, Heller, like hell, excuse me, HELLER.com. We have the free attachment quiz. We're coming out in a very short period of time with the new website. So there'll be all sorts of resources on the website, but there's some on the one we have right now. And we're starting a therapy mastermind circle on neurosculpting that is very highly focused on vagal toning, so it helps you get to your higher levels of the brain, helps regulate your nervous system, helps bring people out of freeze and trauma responses with very practical skills with Lisa Wimberger. That starts in November. And she's going to be teaching neurosculpting for 6 months with us. And then we have Peter Levine course that's talking about working with complex trauma, starts in January, and you can get all this information by getting on my mailing list, and you can write support at DianePooleHeller.com to get on the mailing list so that you can be aware of these courses coming down the road. And then I'm doing a course on how to work with your relationship partner that starts very soon in October, I believe, on working with adult relationships. And you can get a recording of attachment styles that would prepare you for that course if you'd like to take it. And again, you would just write support at DianePooleHeller.com to see about that course. And yeah, we've got lots of courses on attachment throughout the year. The first one's always about learning your attachment style from early time. And then the second one's on how we import that very often into our relationships, how to work with these relationships dynamics that we touched on today. And then we do the neuroscience of healthy relationships. The third level and the fourth level is working with disorganized attachment and victim perpetrator dynamics, if that was part of your history or, that sort of thing. So there's a lot. We're kind of a little mini university on trauma and attachment online. And then we often have one day, we did a whole course on just 2.5 hours on shame, just for everybody, for just the public, and therapists are welcome to listen to it as well. And we also do some for the specifically for the public on attachment styles, much like we talked about today, but a little bit more in depth. And yeah, so we're trying to put out as much affirming information as we can, and we host other people to kind of highlight what they're doing as well when we feel like it really supports healing.
I love that. Thank you. And I definitely might attend the victim perpetrator workshop for sure. So all of that sounds wonderful and interesting. And I so appreciate you coming on here and giving us some wonderful tools and gems. And I definitely encourage people to reach out to you because you're like the godmother of all things attachment, right?
Oh, that's sweet. Never been called a godmother before. I'll take that. That's very sweet. Thank you. It made my day.
Thank you. And thank you for coming.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Natalie, for having me. It's really sweet to be with you and all the gang that you've pulled together.